Morning. A fine Glasgow day. It's wonderful to be here, and I'm genuinely thrilled to be part of a conversation like this. I think there is nothing more important than debating about where do we take our skills development, trying to understand the future of work, this fourth industrial revolution that we talk about. And as Willie said, running the professional body for HR and people development, so the learning and development community is very much part of our community as well. This is a debate that we are very keen to support and help to bring more insight and understanding to. So it's my pleasure to talk to you this morning, and I'm just going to set the scene a little bit with some thoughts on the future of work. I mean, we talk about the fourth industrial revolution. We also talk about that we live in this very uncertain world. It's much harder to predict what's going to happen next. One of my favorite quotes is that if you put a £10 bet in 2016 on the outcome of 3 particular events, you wouldn't be sat in this room because you'd be in a yacht in the Caribbean having earned yourself a couple of £1 million. And those 3 outcomes were, 1, that Donald Trump would end up in the White House, 2, that Britain would vote for Brexit, and anybody know what the third one was? If anybody football fans here? That Leicester City would win the Premiership. And as a Chelsea supporter, I was delighted to see last season normal order was restored in that regard, but we can't get rid of Brexit and we can't get rid of Trump. But the world is changing dramatically, and the debate about globalization, shifting from a world which is seen to be all about more openness and movement of goods, services and labor everywhere, to beginning to feel like, the agenda is shifting. It's more about nationalization and populism, and you've got Catalonia breaking away, and you've got rise of different parties across Europe, much more nationalist agendas. And not least, of course, what's been one of the underpinnings of why we voted Brexit as a nation last year. And that's, of course, also driving a lot of political uncertainty. I was at the Labour Party conference this year and last year, and it was just unbelievable to see the difference. The year before, it was like going into a morgue. It was all about fighting and who was going to assassinate who. And this year, it was like the second coming. And Jeremy Corbyn was being lauded on the stage, as were all his acolytes and people like Dennis Skinner, if you remember him. I watched him in the main plenary session talking about all this stuff. You think, I've just gone back in a time warp. Wasn't he saying that 50 years ago or something? So, and that, of course, that uncertainty creates many challenges for business. And business like more certainty. Well, actually, we have to get over that. We're not going to find more certainty. So we've got to create more agility, more adaptability. And that's got to be the watchword of business. We've got a lot of social and demographic change going on. We talk a lot about the younger generation, what they expect. We're now onto Gen Z and the true digital natives and how they live and expect to live their lives. And, of course, demographic change in terms of things like aging populations. We live in one of the countries of the world which has an aging population. Interestingly, not the worst. Japan is the worst. Do you know which country in Europe has the lowest birth rate and has had for quite some time? Luxembourg. Is it Luxembourg, then? I thought it was Italy. I think it is actually Italy. Anyway, Italy, so there's a good Catholic country with Berlusconi as a role model, and still they have this challenge of the birth rate. So a lot of social and demographic change, and then, of course, a lot around technology. And that's been, I suppose, the precursor of a lot of the debate about the future of work. So this is also driving different ways of working. If you look at the jobs growth in this country and many other countries besides, a lot of it is now coming through small enterprise, micro enterprise, people working in very different ways, the emergence of the so-called gig economy, which we're all trying to understand, and then having these debates about what are the rights of people working in these different forms of contract, and all these sorts of other ideas. And very different organizational models, much more sort of networked organizational models, and much more diverse and dispersed ways in which we all work and go to work. And then you ask young people, where do they want to work? And they're increasingly saying, you know what, I would much rather work in a small business where I got some voice, where people are going to pay me attention, and I got opportunity to grow, versus working in some big faceless bureaucracy. And that is a reflection, again, of a lot of the populism debate that's been going on, is do I have agency? Globalization is all very well, but if that's out of my control and I have no ability to influence the agenda, then that can't be a good thing. And that is particularly what the young generation want. So these are outcomes also in terms of how we have to think about work. And therefore, as I said, a changing jobs economy. And a lot of the jobs growth, not only interesting in small enterprise, but also increasing the high skills space where we're having great challenges as business people in filling the gaps. And if you think about all these surveys, and there are loads, Anthony, I know OECD's been doing a lot on future work stuff, and there are lots of these debates about what jobs are we all going to be doing, and all these projections that say half the jobs that young people who are at school today are going to be doing not yet invented. And actually, whether they're invented or not, the reality is also that the young people today will experience many different jobs during their careers. We've moved from the so-called job for life to a life of jobs. And it is partly, and in particular, I suppose, because of the impact of technology, which is so rapid now and so ubiquitous. And I am definitely of the school of thought that this is different. I heard a lot of people saying, well, we've had technology for 30 years and it's, jobs have disappeared, new ones have been created. But I think 2 or 3 things are different. One was the speed, right? So the speed of what we're seeing now in artificial intelligence, machine learning, the Internet of Things, all these things, is at a far greater pace than anything we've experienced before. Secondly, its ubiquity. It is everywhere. There's not a sector I talk to that's not talking about how they might use technology in order to drive better economic output. Because we have, as you know, in this country, in the United Kingdom, we have real challenges with productivity. And most sectors and organizations saying, well, I need more technology because that will help me to drive productivity and it'll also help me overcome things like skill shortages. If you look at the construction sector, which has long had skill shortages, they are really much more talking about these ideas like off-site prefab and more automation of building and everything else. You look at retail. The British Retail Consortium has estimated that 1 in 3 jobs in retail will disappear in the next 10 years for economic reasons. Because retail is often working off narrow margins, got a big base of labour cost, which is growing because of things like minimum wage and pension and apprenticeship levy and everything else. And the answer for many people increasingly is technology. And as I said, it's also, thirdly, it is the skills that it's displacing. So if you said that technology in the past was more about administrative and process kind of stuff, this is increasingly moving up the skills spectrum. So as I talk to lawyers and accountants and doctors and all these sorts of people saying, we're already beginning to see the impact. And for any lawyers in the room, you know, if you can put all the statutes and all the case law and everything else on a great big machine, which everybody is doing, and you write the algorithms, they'll give you what you need, and then it's about how you apply judgment to that. But then you get the question of, well, if that's going to happen, then how do I train the solicitors of the future? What happens to all the paralegals that I used to have? And that's already a declining market. So these things are creeping up on us at a great rate. And I don't know whether all these predictions are true. Who does, right? But I do believe this is a profoundly important time for us to understand that a lot of the jobs are going to change in the future. So what's that going to mean to our skills base? And that's why I think this debate is so important now. And the reality is, you know, you've probably heard of the war for talent. We are already in a whole different phase of a war for talent, where we have a deficit of skilled workers. You can talk to almost, and it's not just higher skill, interestingly, but there are almost every organization saying there are particular skills that's getting harder and harder to get. And obvious things would be around digital and IT and all these sorts of things, but not exclusively that. Interestingly, I don't know if anybody works in logistics, but I keep hearing in places like logistics that drivers, there's a shortage of truck and lorry drivers. And guess what the answer to that is? Driverless vehicles, right? So this is, and our research shows that, so you got not many applicants for high-skilled jobs, and you got an awful lot of applicants for low-skilled jobs. Now, does that mean to say that we have a low-skilled workforce? No, it doesn't. We have one of the highest-skilled workforces in Europe. We've since the Blair days, been talking about and encouraging all our young people to go to university. What we do have is quite a profound skills mismatch, which has been going on and growing, and it's going to get worse because of all the changes I've talked about. And we have one of the worst skills mismatches in Europe. We have an economy where we are creating more or have historically over the last 10, 15 years, more low-skilled jobs than high-skilled jobs, ironically. And the OECD evidence, when you look at it across OECD countries, says we have one of the largest proportion of low-skilled jobs in the developed world, which is extraordinary when you think about how much we've invested in education. Now, whose fault's that? Well, interestingly, the employers have not been investing enough in developing the kinds of jobs that best utilize the skills of the workforce. And I know I'm probably speaking to a largely Remainer crowd north of the border, as indeed am I, but I'll tell you one thing that Brexit has definitely encouraging more debate on, which is actually, you know what, we haven't invested enough in our workplace. We haven't been utilising the skills of our workforce properly because we've been able to get away with a big supply chain of labour. And I can recruit people with degrees from Eastern Europe who can come in and do a job that doesn't need to be a degree job at all, but it might be seen as a low risk. I've got a 26-year-old with a degree as opposed to an 18-year-old who hasn't worked. So you've got all of that sort of dynamic going on as well. And as I said, the challenge we have around work today is if you look at this mismatch and misuse of skills, if you look at other things like stress in the workplace and well-being and mental health, you look at other things like inclusion, and how we're still debating things like gender diversity, let alone any other aspects of diversity. And you say there's a lot of things that we really have to get our heads around to fix, and this technology stuff that's coming down the track at us is going to make it worse. If we just sit here and let all this stuff be done to us, we'll be in an even worse place. Which is why we do very profoundly believe that the future work is human. We have agency, but we've got to work now collectively to say, all right, what's this future going to result in? What skills are we going to need? How do we encourage employers to invest in the workplace properly, build the kinds of jobs and skills that are good for people? So the whole cobotics idea, I work alongside technology. I'm not managed by technology, but I work alongside it. And there are so many ways that we can use the truly human skills in doing that. So what are employers looking for? Well, increasingly, I pointed out some of the skill shortfalls, but also what more and more employers are looking for is this stuff. They're saying, what I need is people who can come into this workplace, who can engage effectively, who can communicate properly, who have empathy and can collaborate and share, because those are the things that we most need. And we know that we're not going to find job-ready skills out of the education sector. We never could have done, and we certainly can't do it now. So we've got to build this stuff in the workplace, and we've got to focus more on how we do these things. So you will have seen it in many employers doing things like taking all the going as far as taking the qualifications off the CVs as they present them to the managers. Because we're sort of assuming in many places, particularly with young people, they've got the qualifications. But the question is have they got these other skills? So as we look at the future of all of this stuff, which is why I'm thrilled to be here, Damien, and the work that Skills Development Scotland is doing on this is fantastic, is we need much more of a collective debate about how we understand the skills landscape. And this is a sort of simple framework we started to put together. So at the lowest level is what we've talked about as employability skills. Now, how long have we been talking about that? I remember reading a survey from the CBI about 15 to 20 years ago, might even been, that said the problem we have with young people is they don't have these employability skills, and we're having to apply kind of retrospective training as to how to turn up properly and present yourself at work and communicate effectively. We've been talking about this stuff for a long time, but believe it or not, we have not yet even got a common definition for what we mean by these things, and we should. And I'm determined that we will get there. But you look across some of these things, and it is stuff like basic work disciplines. It is stuff like basic communication skills. It is stuff like literacy and numeracy, which you probably know the stats for the United Kingdom are shocking. And we've got to get these basic things right. And it isn't good enough in an education system to say it's okay, we've got all these young people with a GCSE or whatever equivalent in Scotland in maths, when they come in to work and they can't tell you anything about what a percentage is or how to do an interest, understanding interest rates. And one of my favorite examples is this, and it's such a core skill, financial understanding. Who watches Dragon's Den? You watch that? Do you think that the producers go out and deliberately try to find people who have no idea about numbers, don't know what cost of goods are or a profit margin is? No, they don't. The sad fact is I might have a GCSE in maths, but I don't know that stuff. I might have learned about simultaneous equations. My youngest daughter, who's probably most outspoken of my three daughters, I had to help her with her GCSE maths a couple of years ago. Simultaneous equations. So I said, I'll come back to you tomorrow, because I couldn't even remember what bloody simultaneous. So I mugged up on it, and we sat down the following day. After 10 minutes, she said, why do I have to learn this? And I said, because it's important. She said, all right, give me one instance in your life when you've used a simultaneous equation. And of course, I couldn't think of one. So we've got a mismatch on a number of things in education. I would say it's certainly who's responsible for all of this. I would say fundamentally with our young people, we've got to help them to ensure we have at least these levels of skills. But we've also, as business people, got to be more articulate on exactly what we mean by employability skills and anchor that. But this is the layer that I'm even more intrigued by, which is that if you look at all the future of work, we could all sit here and we'd all write down all these jobs that might be around in 5 or 10 years, and I'm pretty sure we'd all be wrong. But what we absolutely can and must identify are common skills that we're all going to need. And interestingly, in all the debate about the future of work and all the forums that I sit in, we've got a big future of work as a human community, and all this stuff, more and more what people talk about is the human skills. It's what Willie started off, it kicked off. It said, okay, so we're going to have to learn technical and job things, we're going to have to do it, but the things that we're really going to need and make us different are our human skills. And interesting, if you look across this sort of spectrum, you could say at this level, let's start with that one, critical thinking and situational judgment. Have you heard of the expression that we live in a post-truth world? You know, it was one of the new words in the Oxford English Dictionary last year. We now have oxymoronic statements like alternative facts. You've either got facts or you haven't. We now seems to be okay to talk about alternative facts. We've got a young generation growing up where they are getting their truth from places like Facebook. And then what does Facebook do? Well, you know, if you like this kind of stuff, if you like reading, you know, right-wing dogma, here's some more of it. Because you like this, you like that. And then we talk about a young generation that increasingly is not resilient. It's not resilient to contrasting and contradictory ideas. And my goodness, in the future world, if we can't think critically, where are we? This is a life skill as much as it is a business skill. And that's what we need in business. Critical thinking, ability to analyze facts, understand what's going on, draw some conclusions from it, and take some action is absolutely fundamental. I don't care what the job is going to be, we need that. And being able to judge situations. We need organizational skills. People understand how to network and collaborate and share and all those sorts of things. Understand things like projects, many of the things that drive every job and every part of organization. People management and understanding diversity. It's extraordinary how in business we've done such a poor job of teaching and developing and recognizing and rewarding basic people skills. Line managers who are promoted because they're technically competent, trained to be more technically competent, and then find that they can't do it. And then we wonder why we've got problems with diversity. We wonder why we can't build more flexible working environments because the barrier becomes the line manager. Because the line manager says, well, this is all too bloody hard for me. You want to work part-time or job share? I don't know how to deal with that. I've got a job to do, and you've got a job to do, so get on and do it. And I've had these arguments with big engineering companies. I remember talking at a conference not long ago and saying this, and this guy was absolutely having a go at me. He said, I run a production line, and they have to be there 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, or 2 shifts, or whatever, and that's it. And I said, well, good luck. Because the future of work and how people want to work more flexibly, work-life blending and all this sort of stuff, and encouraging more diverse talent to your organization is going to depend on our ability to think differently and provide opportunity for flexible work. And it can be done in those environments as well. And then you get into the ideas of entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship, creativity. How do I do that? How do I influence others? How do I develop opinions and views? As I said, another 2 core skills here. Financial understanding I've already talked about. And these are life skills. Why do we have such problems with indebtedness? Why do we have such problems with the older generation who haven't saved for their future? If they haven't got the financial understanding, it's really hard. And I was talking to the pensions ministers about this stuff last week, and that's one of the biggest concerns we have. And I said, but this is a business skill as well. Why can't we all agree that we need these things and then embed them in our educational system and embed them in our apprenticeships? Now, south of the border, it's a very depressing conversation, this stuff, because we are not having this collective conversation. I've been arguing with the Department for Education, the Institute for Apprenticeships, and all these others, that where we are going is an increasing fragmentation of qualifications at the precise point in time when we need to find the common core. And we've got to build from that common core. And then, frankly, we shouldn't be, and the apprenticeship levy is driving some of these behaviours, unfortunately, we shouldn't then be saying that every damn job I've got in my organisation, every skill I need today should be turned into an apprenticeship. We should say, no, build these common core skills, then we'll have to be really adept and agile at how we build these skills in the workplace. So now is the time for this debate, and as I said, I'm not seeing this debate happening enough. I'm certainly not seeing it happening in Westminster, but I am beginning to see it, and I applaud you for it, this kind of debate happening in Scotland. And the great thing in Scotland is you've got your hands on a lot of these levers, right? The apprenticeship frameworks, the educational system, working with the employers. And I think you can make a real, real difference. It is happening in other countries. Germany is particularly good at this stuff. It also links to other ideas like industrial strategy. If we cannot, and we've failed so many times in this country to land a sensible industrial strategy, then how can we have a sensible debate about skills? And yet all the stuff that Scottish Enterprise and others are doing are understanding the future of Scotland from an industry and a demand side allows us then to anchor the debate about the supply side of skills. But we have been failed so much in this ability to understand supply and demand. And instead what we've done is shove into the supply side and hope it's going to result in something in demand. And as I've already pointed out, it hasn't. Now that is not just the fault of the educational system, it is also the challenge of the employers. And the employers have got to get much more articulate, again, on what skills you're really looking for. And stop giving me job maps and job categories and competency frameworks and think about this stuff. And think about the future jobs. I don't know what they're all going to be, but I should know for my business what my core capabilities and differentiating capabilities are. I should know what kinds of real skills, and particularly these people skills that I really need and how I develop them, and make that the debate. Because we're in the danger, and have been for a long time in business, of being precisely wrong as opposed to approximately right. Here's all the jobs, and I know exactly how many jobs, and I need 5 more of them and 2 more of them, which is precisely wrong versus approximately right. So there's all of that, and then final quick thoughts, and I've made this point already. We have underinvested in this country in skills in the workplace. It's really shocking when you look at the data. We're not creating the jobs, as I said, that utilize the skills, and we've been underinvesting in the workplace. And why has that been happening? Well, it's a lot, again, because of that cheap supply of labour. It's also because there's too much short-termism in this country, more so than many others, particularly in the private sector. And still a conviction, I think, in many business leaders that say, yeah, well, if I train them, they're just going to leave and all that kind of nonsense. And we can't think like that. And secondly, of course, in a world where more and more people are going to be working anyway between and across and through organizations, then you get the questions which are, okay, so if in the past we believed that employers would train the workforce of the future, can we depend on that model for going forwards? And the answer is no, we can't. For the reasons I've already said. More people working in small enterprise. They don't have the resources to go train people all over the place. More people are more mobile, moving between organizations or working in these very networked ways. So how do we create a system that supports people as they move between jobs, lifelong learning, which again is not a very cultural thing in our country. People think when they've finished education, I'm done with learning. You're never done with learning. So how do we create that environment too? So lifelong learning, adult learning. In Denmark, they've long had this system called flexicurity, which flexible security, recognizes we're going to have a more flexible workforce and job environment, but we've got to provide the security for people between it. And people carry things like training budgets with them, which is one of the things that we've been arguing with the UK government on the apprenticeship levy, which is ill-conceived. It should be much more about, I've got an individual training budget, which maybe I can use in lots of different ways. So we've got some very profound things to think about that. And last quick point, and I'll summarize. Last quick point is we've also got to reinvent how we do learning, particularly in the workplace. And I'm sure, David, you're looking at these sorts of things, but we've really not done a good job of this. I mean, we've used these paradigms of training in the workplace. I'm going to sit somebody in a classroom, I'm going to give them a PowerPoint presentation, and if it's leadership development, I'm going to ram about 10 things down their throat and say, you better remember that stuff. We know people don't learn that way. We've got to embed much more the science of learning, neuroscience and all these other things into the heart of the learning system. And then we've got to use technology and all these other things to help to create a much better learning environment, moving way beyond the early iterations of e-learning into true digital learning, immersive learning, bite-sized learning, learning that's embedded in the process, peer learning. And then recognize also that a lot of the stuff that we need to teach people, we don't have to sit there with a blank sheet of paper and write it. Because, first of all, the younger generation are going to go somewhere else anyway. My youngest daughter, I was telling you about the GCSE maths, I also found that she put all her textbooks in the bin when she was supposed to be doing her maths revision. All of them in the bin. I said, what on earth are you doing? She said, you know what, I found some better YouTube videos explaining how to do equations. And that's what I've learned from, which is why we talk about a generation growing up which is more of self-directed learners. Now the question is if they're working in that way, are they learning the right stuff? did she find the best YouTube video? What we've got to create is a learning environment that, first and foremost, aggregates and curates good stuff. There's a lot of stuff out there. How do you aggregate it and curate it? How do you then present it in ways that are appealing, attractive, and using the science of learning that I really learn this stuff? And recognizing the difference between learning a skill and developing a capability. And particularly when we talk about all this people-oriented stuff, you can't teach line managers to better manage people and be all empathetic and to deal with paradox and uncertainty and understand diversity by shoving them in classrooms and giving them a bunch of PowerPoint. It's a developmental thing. You've got to give them the experience. You've got to give them the opportunity to learn in a developmental way. So we have to, I would say throughout the educational system, whether it's in educational work, we've also got to challenge and confront the fact that we've got to do this much better. And there are many, many organizations starting to do this stuff in very, very exciting ways. And this is a great opportunity for us. So in the end, I think when you look at all of this stuff, it is this need for broad cooperation. It is a recognition that, yeah, we've got policy stuff we've got to understand. We've got to try to influence the policy stuff where we can. As I said, I think you have more of your hand on the levers in Scotland than certainly I find in Westminster. We've got to think about business and education, how they work together. And Willie and I were talking about the colleges, and I think a lot of the colleges are working really well. A lot of the universities, and I know the universities involved in the centre here are very good at working closely with business. We've got to make the educational system and the work system mesh much more. And it's not just for young people, it's for adults as well. So that's it. I mean, as I said, to me, this is a really, really exciting time. It's an incredibly exciting time. But we've got to grab these things. We've got to have this collective debate, which is why I love this kind of symposium and discussion you're having here. And we've got to make sure that we work collectively on this stuff and share our best thinking, which is, of course, what the centre's here for as well. So I look forward to the rest of the day, and I certainly look forward to, from us, you have my commitment as the head of the CIPD to really engage with you and support this agenda in Scotland. I think it's so powerful, and I think a lot of the rest of the country can learn from it. And so I look forward to the rest of the day. Thank you very much.